All right, Martin Popoff here. Welcome back to another episode of the Contrarians. You know, we have some special shows from time to time that haven't followed whatever formats. But I've got a buddy of mine here, David K. Tedds. He's an industry legend. He's part of our email group that we have where all sorts of crazy stuff we get into. We're always arguing about things. It's really cool. But one of the things I've always been fascinated with, and I have my own stories about this as well, but I've always liked this idea of what was it like being on the ground floor for some of these legendary albums, and what the heck could you even compare any of these albums to? And David's been around for some of these really key records in terms of the birth of hard rock and heavy metal. So I've got him here. We're going to go through some of these early albums. We're talking late 60s, 1970, maybe a little into 1972. But yeah, so we're just going to have a discussion about some of these and what it was like. So I'll turn it over to David, who can tell us a little bit about what he's done in the industry, and then we'll dive into our first record.
Yeah, good to be here, Martin. I'll tell everybody how old I am. I'm 67. I was born in 56. So this will give you an idea when we talk about the year these albums were released, like how old I was.
Yep.
I was born in England, and my family moved to the States when I was 8 years old, and they moved to the suburbs of Detroit. Now, Detroit had some amazing music come out of it, both Motown and hard rock. My parents split up in 70, and I went back to England for a year. I hated it, and the only positive thing was I got to see a lot of music because the concert halls were small and there was public transportation. So I was in Coventry, England. I was going to Birmingham. I saw Sabbath there. I saw King Crimson. I saw Uriah Heep. A lot more. I saw a lot of shows in my hometown of Coventry. I saw Deep Purple in a theater in early 71. I saw The Who in a college auditorium. So I stayed there for a year in 70, 71. And then I came back to Detroit and lived with my dad up until from 71 to 79. And then I moved out to California. So I've been here for 43 years. While I was in Detroit, I managed several record stores. Then I was the buyer at a record distributor. And then the last 2 years I was in Detroit, I did radio promotion. Went around to radio stations and tried to convince them to play the records I was repping. Moved out to California, worked in record stores again, went and worked in a record distributors again. And just as a matter of coincidence, I was introduced to somebody who was in the licensing division of Warner Electro Atlantic who needed an assistant. So I went and interviewed, got the gig, started as an assistant, and about 3 years later, I was VP of licensing for Warner Electro Atlantic. Stayed there for 10 years. And then what would I do right after that? I did some independent stuff, but then I went and worked. The independent stuff. I went and worked for Capital EMI for a year until the division got dissolved, and I did what's called catalog reissues at that point. That would be CD reissues, box sets, greatest hits, that kind of stuff. And so I reissued a lot of albums there. I did the entire Grand Funk Railroad catalog, the entire Queensryche catalog, Robin Trower, UFO, George Thorogood. Then I went to work for an independent record label and stayed there for a couple of years until I hit 62. And the music industry has changed so much that when I hit 62, I went, screw this. Give me my Social Security. I'm done. So I've been retired for 5 years. And it's pretty cool.
Yeah, excellent.
People go, don't you get bored? No, I don't get bored.
Yeah.
So that's a brief history there.
Okay.
But even from the time when I was a kid, I was just absolutely, like 5 years old, I was absolutely music crazy. Just nuts. When I got to be about 10, 11 years old, any extra money I had, I spent on buying albums and 45s.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I bought whatever music magazines I could.
Yeah.
So, like you're saying, I was on the ground when a lot of these groundbreaking albums came out. And because there was older guys in my neighborhood who said, "Oh, you ought to check out so and so," I would go and buy albums that I'd never heard.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were like the duds, but other ones were these legendary albums. So, I've been doing this pretty much all my life.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So yeah. So I'll try to ask some pointed questions. And again, it's about, we're going to like focus on invention and talk about one of the biggest inventors, like Jimi Hendrix. What did you think when you first heard him? What could you possibly compare it to? What were people saying about it? What do you think reviews were saying? Like, where did this guy come from, and how was he sort of, received back then?
Well, I'm a Jimi fanatic. I've got about 150 vinyl albums of Jimi, and I got about 350 Jimi CDs. Okay. I remember exactly where I was the first time I heard Hendrix. I was sitting on a street corner talking to my friends, and somebody had an AM radio, little handheld radio, and on came Purple Haze. And we all went, "Who is this? This is incredibly cool." Mm-hmm. So at that point, I go and buy Are You Experienced? And a bunch of my friends go and buy it, and we start reading magazine articles. But that was the whole thing with Jimi. And the reason I'm such a huge fan is that there was no precedent to what he was doing. Mm-hmm. He was playing guitar like nobody before him. Obviously, you had guys like Jeff Beck who were sort of abusing their instrument to a certain degree, but not to what Jimi was doing. And everybody who was into music seriously, even if you were like 12 years old, like I was, or 11 years old, was just blown away by this guy. And, the small bits of video that we'd see, we were just blown away. It was just like nothing we'd ever seen before.
Okay, but let me ask you this. So you think of the intro to Perfect Haze and some of the heavier songs on that.
Purple Haze.
It must, yeah. I mean, it must have been.
You've been drinking, huh?
What did I say?
Perfect Haze.
Did I say Perfect Haze? Okay. Purple Haze. So you think about that, right? And it must have almost been like, was it like when we heard Motorhead or Venom for the first time? Because you think of the intro and it must have sounded scary or noisy or something. Like, don't just say, it sounded great. I mean, it must have been sort of foreign and weird sounding, almost like kind of like, no.
Yeah, there was nothing that, like, you think of the opening of Purple Haze, like dun, 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 dun.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard anything like that. Yeah, and it was kind of scary, but it was scary in an inviting kind of way.
Yeah.
Right. And after, it goes into the chord progression, dun, 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 it was like, I want to hear more of whatever this guy's doing right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it was so foreign. There wasn't anything like it at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost like if your reaction is that much and you want to hear it again and you love it, it's almost like a new species of human was being invented on the spot, a metalhead. I mean, because really, what else, what else could you compare it to? I mean, the verses of that song are pretty standard, but the intro is not. And then when it gets to the "Excuse Me While I Kiss the Sky" thing, that's not standard either. That's pretty scary, right?
Yeah.
So yeah. Now, okay, one other thing about Jimi. Did it seem like when I look back, like, did it seem like this was the first guitarist where it seemed like the guitar was an extension of his body, while the other guys are all like, I've got this instrument, I'm a maestro. But Jimi, it's it literally looked like his arm, right?
Yeah, I think what it was because he played with such physicality.
Yeah.
Right. And like, I guess the term in sports term would be body English. When he would grab a note and bend the hell out of it, he wasn't just standing there doing that. His head rolled back and his body sort of convulsed. And so it was. I've never seen anybody perform like that. And obviously the crowd at the Monterey Pop Festival in '68, they had never seen, or '67 rather, they had never seen anything like that too, especially when he's burned his guitar at the end of the show. Yeah, there was just nothing like him. There's no precedent for what Hendricks was doing.
Okay, one other question. Did anybody think it was a bunch of noise?
Yeah, my dad did.
Uh-huh. But what about kids? I mean, did every kid like it? I mean, did you look around and go, well, I guess everybody's a metalhead?
No, there was a lot of younger people who didn't get it, and maybe there was a lot of other music around at the time that younger people enjoyed. A lot of pop music. '68, there's the Monkees and all the AM pop singles, and so there were people that were just like into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think most of the girls that I knew at the time, they weren't really fond of it because it was aggressive.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's put Jimmy aside for a second and move on to Iron Butterfly. So you hear In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida for most pointedly. I mean the heavy album or whatever. I mean there's some heavy tracks all over the place, right? But In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida, you gotta kind of get the first sort of tritone, Diablos in Musica, right? That you get that scary sound to it, right?
Right.
Although there's not massive distorted guitar. It's like a mix of organ. It's still kind of hippie.
No, there is. No,
okay.
The guitar on that all through the song is massively distorted.
Okay. It's not super loud. It's not super high in the mix though, right? Because you think of a studio version of that. I mean, I'm hearing the organ in my head, right?
Yeah. No, the guitar is right there. It's up in the mix and it's distorted. I actually listened to it over the weekend, and it wasn't in preparation for doing this. It was because I love that thing so much. I regularly listen to it still, 56, 7 years later.
Yeah.
But the first time I heard that, there was like a 3-minute edit of that got played on AM radio. So that's where I heard it for the first time. And then I was at a neighbor's house who was a couple of years older than me, and he got the album, and I looked at it and I went, why is this thing 17 minutes long? What are you talking about? And he said, oh, what you're hearing on the radio is just a small part of the song. Mm-hmm. And then it became like, as a badge of honor musically, if you were in the know, you knew about the full version of In-A-Gadda-Da-Vida. And if you were a young person, this is what you played after your parents went to bed, and you turned the lava lamp on and the black light and lit clouds of incense, and you put on that side of the album. I did.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, so here's a subtle question. I mean, where did Iron Butterfly rank, like say 68, not even really into 69? Where do they rank in terms of how heavy this band was versus, say, Hendricks or any? Did you know Blue Cheer, for example, at this point yet?
Oh, I knew Blue Cheer. Yeah, I knew Blue Cheer. But I mean, geez, as far as heaviness at the time, I don't think anything compares to Blue Cheer. I mean, they're in a category all of their own. Okay. But Iron Butterfly, they were notoriously heavy. Mm-hmm. Compared to other bands. I mean, they were right there with Hendricks as far as that kind of reputation.
Mm-hmm. But so again, not moving into 69 at this point, the acceptance of this kind of stuff was fairly universal, or was there much hatred for it? Because I'm trying to get a sense of did a lot of people like heavy music, or was there a lot
of young people liked heavy music? I mean, enough that Hendricks and Iron Butterfly were playing arenas at the time, right? Yeah. But obviously the thing you got to remember is politically what was going on, which was the Vietnam War, and the parents' attitudes, politicians' attitudes were like, these fucking drug addicted long hairs are ruining our society. And it wasn't just that kind of feeling in the background. It was really overt. You had Richard Nixon on television saying this stuff in those terms. He probably left out the swear word. So there was a real divide between younger people and adults at that time. And obviously, one of the ways that younger people rebel against their the parents and anybody else who's older than them is via music. So me and my friends and a lot of other people just delighted in playing this music around older people or telling them how much we enjoyed this stuff because we knew it pissed them off.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of younger people were into this stuff at the time.
Okay.
A lot.
All right. So next question. What did you like about Led Zeppelin?
Here's my Led Zeppelin story in a nutshell. There was a department store a couple of blocks from where I lived in the suburb of Detroit, and it had a decent record department in it.
Yeah.
I used to go and buy most of my albums from there. So I go in one day and they've just got a shipment of albums, and they're in boxes. And this younger guy is opening these boxes and taking the albums out and pricing them and putting them in the bin. And I'm looking through these albums before he's priced them, and he's going, "Hey, leave those alone until I get to them, or whatever." He picks up a chunk of albums out of this box, and the next album down was the first Zeppelin album. Okay. And I looked at it and I went, "That's the coolest cover I've ever seen, Led Zeppelin." And I picked it up out of the box and turned it over, and on that back photo of those guys, they're just looking straight into the camera. Yeah. They're not making stupid faces or laughing. And I just thought that the looks on their faces meant that they were serious about what they were doing. Yeah. I had a quick scan and I looked, oh, it's a power trio with a singer like The Who. Yeah. And the guy said, "Put that back in there." I said, "Just put a price sticker on this. I'll take it." I had no idea who these guys were, nothing. And I took it home and put it on. And at this point, I'm still listening to a lot of AM pop stuff. And I put that on. And I'm sure you've had this reaction yourself, Martin, where you play something and you go, the first time you hear it, you go, "I don't get this fully. But I think 3 or 4 plays down the line, yeah, I'm really going to enjoy this." And some of the songs I got, the short Communication, Breakdown, Good Times, Bad Times, those I got immediately. But, Dazed and Confused and How Many More Times, I was like, I don't fully get it, but I got it really, really quick. And again, that stuff, Zeppelin was so different in many ways to any other band that had preceded them. I couldn't go back to listening to pop stuff at the time. It completely changed what I was listening to and what I was about.
Was there any element of this idea that you kind of hear that one of the advantages of Zeppelin is that they were one of the more exciting bands who was kind of semi-burying the British blues boom, because the British blues boom is kind of boring. So they're like the flashiest version.
I know what you're saying. I like the British blues boom, right? I mean, I like Savoy Brown and early Fleetwood Mac and stuff, but I take your point completely that Zeppelin, while they had a lot of elements of that blues boom, they were playing it with such intensity that they didn't sound like the rest of those bands.
Yeah.
And that may have what got to me, because I'd heard Savoy Brown at that point and Fleetwood Mac, and it was like, okay, this is cool. I like this stuff. But Zeppelin was so different. And also not just the intensity, but the way nobody sang like Plant at that time. Yeah. They sound holy raw coming out of this guy's mouth. And you could tell what a virtuoso Page and Bonham were. Those kind of musicians, that level of musicianship combined with intensity wasn't present in the other British blues boom bands. And plus this, like a lot of older, I mean, you know, my friends, all the brothers and sisters were into those kind of blues bands. This was a band that had just put out their first album, and I got into it. This was my band. This was my blues boom band.
Right. Yeah. And what did you think of them in relation to Blue Cheer or Iron Butterfly or Hendricks? Were they young
Again, I
to
thought
you? Were they a young band? I mean, were they?
yeah,
Like you
yeah.
say,
Well, it was hard to tell, you know, when you looked at the back, you know, you looked on the cover of an Iron Butterfly album or a Hendrix album, and you looked at the back of the Zeppelin album. It was hard to tell when you're 12, 13 years old. They just look like older guys to you.
Yeah.
You know, you don't go, wait a second, I think this guy's 23, but that dude's 27.
Yeah.
That doesn't come into the equation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then what happens when you hear MC5 kick out the jams? How did you get that? And what did you think of them?
They were a Detroit band, and that was a big thing in Detroit among the music lovers of supporting the local bands.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew who they were by reading Detroit magazines around that time, but I'd never heard them. And then a single of Kick Out the Jams got played on AM radio, but instead of the opening of Kick Out the Jams Motherfuckers, it was edited to Kick Out the Jams Brothers and Sisters. Mm-hmm. And I heard that, and again, super aggressive and pounding. And I just had a predilection for this kind of music. Yeah. Plus, they were from Detroit. So I went out and bought the album, gatefold album, looked at the inner sleeve, and there's an essay from their manager, John Sinclair, who was also head of the White Panther Party. Yeah. And in it, he's saying about the MC5 are a total thing. They live together. They walk down the street together. They get high together. They fuck together. I'm 13. I'm going, oh my God. Yeah. And I'm hoping to God that my parents don't find this. Well, my brother, he's 4 years younger than me, and we got in an argument, and he marched into the living room and said, Dad, David's got an album in the bedroom that says, Kick Out the Jams, motherfuckers. This is 69. I'm 13. He's like 9, 10 years old. The color just drained from my father's face. Yeah. My brother comes back in the bedroom and nothing happened. And I thought, maybe my dad's so freaked out about this, he's not going to say anything. Yeah. Next thing, the bedroom door just almost comes off the hinges. My dad goes, where's that album? Where's that album? And my brother goes, over here. And my dad takes the album, rips it in half, and smashes the record.
Crazy. Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, saying motherfucker when you're 13 years old in 1969, you couldn't even say asshole or bitch or anything like this on television. This was so out there, for parents at that point. So I went and bought another copy of it, of course, and kept that well hidden and from my brother.
What did you pay for records in 69 in Detroit, David?
$2.99, $2.49.
Yeah.
And by the way, Martin, these are all my original pressings of the albums we're discussing.
All right.
All of them.
Yeah.
Nice. They got some road wear on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool. Where does the first Stooges album fit in this story? Did you have it before MC5 or after?
Or I believe I got that shortly after Kick Out the Jams.
Okay.
And again, it was because they were a Michigan band and they were really aggressive. And every cover band in Detroit played I Wanna Be Your Dog, including my cover band, because it was 3 chords.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Did you ever run into any of those guys from those bands downtown?
Not at the time, because I was too young. Later on, maybe late teens, early 20s, I got to know some of these guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, I picked Funhouse as opposed to to the first album, because as much as I love that first album, Funhouse is such an evolutionary leap for that band. They suddenly become super tight. Dave Alexander, the bass player, it's almost like he's the Robert Johnson of Michigan rock. On the first album, he's just going do, 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 do. The second album, which is like 6 months later, he's playing these slamming tight bass lines. It's like, how do you get this good in 6 months?
Okay. I got a question about Funhouse, though, because it's definitely way dirtier sounding. And it almost strikes me as it might be the very first album that's recorded badly on purpose. Because the first album actually sounds better than the second album, right?
Yeah.
So what did you think when you heard that production? I mean, did it excite you, or did you go, why are they doing this?
Yes.
That's another Venom moment, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the first album they recorded multi-track in a studio. Funhouse, they all set up in a recording studio in one room out here and recorded pretty much all those tracks live.
Yeah.
And so you get all the bleed through from the instruments into the mics, which creates the distortion.
Yeah.
And the distortion didn't put me off. It just sounded more slamming and more visceral.
Yeah.
And so I loved it. And I love the songs, the compositions. It's funny talking about Superior Stooges compositions. You know, it sounds like a contradiction in terms, really. Yeah. But I thought the songs on Funhouse were just incredible.
Mm-hmm. And so in '69, I mean, was there something more exciting about these two Detroit bands versus the things that you were hearing out of Britain or anything psychedelic? I mean, did it feel like an evolution in heavy metal or something? Did it feel more dangerous?
It wasn't. By the way, Funhouse is 1970. The first Stooges album was 69.
Yeah.
What it was that they were Detroit bands, and they just had reputations for just, when they went and played, for just tearing the house down. Right. You know, expect no mercy. And of course, they got arrested frequently for whatever they were doing.
Yeah.
You know, Iggy taking his pants off, and you know, Rob Tyner, the singer of the MC5, saying "motherfucker."
Yeah.
The MC5 would get warned before the gigs from the local police. Don't even think about saying that word. We'll arrest you. Okay, we won't say it. Second song in, kick out the jams, motherfuckers. And these cops would swarm on them. That was extremely, what would the term be? Enticing for young people who were not real happy with the cops, who at the time were beating up people simply because they had long hair.
Yeah.
So that was pretty cool that these guys were sort of so defiant in the face of the law. That was a lot of the charm and the pull of those two bands in particular.
Yeah. What did you imagine that the personalities of Blue Cheer would be like, this California band, this place you hadn't been yet kind of thing?
Yeah. I thought that they would probably didn't have much of a stage show. That was my, like, you know, I didn't really have anything to back that up. Oh, well, actually I did. They played on was it the Ed Sullivan Show? One of those kind of shows, and they played Summertime Blues, and the mics are so overloaded in the TV studios, but they just kind of stood there and played it. Right. And that was it. And on the album, some of the live pictures on the album covers, it didn't look like they were like really going off.
Yeah. Interesting. Do you remember getting Led Zeppelin II as a new release?
Yeah, Christmas '69.
And what were your thoughts of that record?
My parents said, "What do you want for Christmas?" I was like, "Duh, I want albums." Yeah. I got the first Grand Funk album. I got Savoy Brown's A Step Further, and I got Led Zeppelin II.
Nice.
They had started to play the edited version of Whole Lot of Love on AM radio. And that riff, you know, anybody I think who hears that riff for the first time, who's into music, just goes, "Oh my God."
Yeah.
And I certainly did. So when I got that, I thought it was different from the first album. It was like more expansive and took in more elements than the first album did.
Yeah.
But it was still, I was addicted to that band.
Yeah. That Whole Lot of Love riff is an advancement in metal. I mean, Zeppelin didn't do a heck of a lot to advance metal. I mean, there are these other bands we've talked about already, and some we're going to talk about, but
yeah,
that particular riff was almost like a Metallica Kill 'Em All moment, where you've got this raised level of discipline and tightness and palm mutedness. You know what I mean? Like it's literally almost like flash forward 14 years or whatever it is. God, I can't believe it's not that many years difference between them. But yeah, that one, I mean, you must have, you and your buddies must have noticed that there was something extra special and moving forward and modern about that in particular, and Heartbreaker, Live and Love and Mate as well, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you had Thank You, which is the last song on the first side of the vinyl, and something like that with the sort of pastoral feeling, and just this sort of floating kind of thing, and plus he's Plant singing Thank You to his wife at the time. There wasn't anything like that on the first album.
Yeah, yeah. Do you remember the narrative that everybody has taken for gospel now about Led Zeppelin III being the shocking acoustic album? I mean, what was your guys' receipt of Led Zeppelin III in 1970?
Led Zeppelin III was when my parents had split up and I'd gone back to England.
Okay.
So my dad comes over from America to England to ask my mother, "Are you coming back?" She wasn't. My phrase here, my stock phrase is, her hatred of America and her hatred of my father have grown in equal proportion, so she just decided to sever both of them in one go. So my dad comes over and he's feeling guilty. Me and him go downtown Coventry and we go by a record store. I said, "Can I go in there?" "Yeah, sure." He goes, "Do you want an album?" My dad offering to buy me music was unheard of. And I knew that this new Zeppelin album was out.
Yeah.
So I said, "Yeah." And I said, "The guy behind the counter, you got a new Zeppelin album?" He goes, "Yep." It had been out for a matter of days. And my dad said, "Do you want another one?" Oh my God, I can't believe this.
Yeah.
And so I looked over and I saw Grand Funk's live album, which was a double album, but for the price of a single album. So I thought, I was into Grand Funk anyway. They're a Detroit band, or close enough. So I went, yeah, Grand Funk's live album. And I've later learned that the pressing of Zepp 3 that I got is a first pressing that's got the Jimmy Page Crowley quotes on the runoff grooves. And it's also got like a credit for Peter Grant that only the first pressing has. So I've just learned, oh, great, I got the first pressing, which happens to be worth $400 or $500 or whatever it is. But yeah, the first side of that album is, I thought, was pretty standard Zeppelin stuff. You had the heavy blues like he had on the first, Since I've Been Loving You, like had on the first couple albums, they had heavy blues on it. An Immigrant Song was akin to Whole Lot of Love with the riff. When I turned it over and got all the acoustic songs, that was like, wait a second, what? Pretty much a whole side of acoustic material. But the thing was that saved it was those songs, acoustic or not, are really great songs. Tangerine, Gallows Pole, just brilliant songs. So, I could live with that, but I definitely played the first side more than I did the second.
Yeah. All right. So, okay. So how about Black Sabbath one? What's your story of hearing that for the first time?
I'm in England then still. You could go to the local library and they had a record section and you could check out records, check out meaning like sign for them and take them home, just like you could books.
Okay.
And so I'd been in England a couple of months, and I'm reading Melody Maker and New Musical Express and those magazines, and I see, there's articles about Sabbath in there, and I'm reading the descriptions of these guys, and looking at them. I think I've got to check these guys out. So I go to the library and I'm thumbing through the album, and there's the first Sabbath album. So I go, oh, great. So I check it out, take it home. I didn't get to play it that day.
Okay.
So that must have been on a Friday. Excuse me. Because on Saturday I had the day off. So I'm lying in bed and I got my little portable record player next to me. Like, let me hear this album. I take it and I put it on, drop the needle on the first side, and I've got a real memory of this. This is one of the things about music, is that it just burns into your frontal cortex. And put it on, and you get the rain and the thunder and everything like that, and then suddenly that riff comes in. I think I levitated about a foot off my bed. It's like, oh my God. But again, even though it doesn't have the subtleties of the Zeppelin stuff, I just loved it because it was so heavy. And I loved the second side with the long sleeping village warning, that whole section there where you get the unaccompanied Iommi riffs, and that was different to what I was used to hearing. But I thought that, the first side where, you got the title song, the Wizard, NIB. How can you go wrong with that?
So that's kind of a crucial point. Like those three songs, what could you possibly compare it to, and how did you compare it to anything?
I didn't. And I think this is the thing when you're younger, is that because you're not just musically unsophisticated, you're unsophisticated in general. You haven't been around the block too many times. So it was almost like I didn't, listen to music and go, well, how does this album compare to this as far as sound quality and whatever? I just didn't analyze it. Just put it on and took it as it was. And it just became, do I like this or do I not like this? And there was something about these heavy albums that resonated with me in a massive way.
Did you recognize that it was the heaviest thing you'd ever heard, or did you recognize that it was the scariest thing you'd ever heard?
Well, I'll tell you that first chord scared the shit out of me, hence the levitation off the bed. I didn't think about, is this the heaviest compared to the other stuff I'm listening to?
Right.
It just didn't, I just took it as a whole and went, do I like this? Hell yeah, I like this. And I went and saw them a couple of months later too.
How many albums did you have at this point, and did you bring them all over with you when you moved?
I didn't, because when we went over there, I thought we were coming back in about 3 weeks. And it was the end of the 3 weeks. My mother announced, we're not going back to America, whatever. And to say I was pissed is the most major understatement. But funny you ask. I don't know whether you had them, but they used to have these record carriers that you put your albums in, and they have ones for 45. So they're all like a box with a handle on it, and they've got some graphics on the outside. And they came with an index card inside of it. Like you really need an index card to find 25 albums, right?
Right.
That's the index card
from
this first bunch of albums I had. And these would be the first albums. I'll just go quick. I mean, just bandwise. Beatles, the Bee Gees, 3 Cream albums, 2 Iron Butterfly albums, Crazy World of Arthur Brown, first Zeppelin album, Bob Seger's first album, Monkeys, couple of Monkeys album, SRC, who are a group from Detroit.
Yeah.
More Monkeys, Bob Dylan's Nashville Skyline, because I was trying to be, kind of hip at 13. Steppenwolf, Three Dog Night, the first couple of Doors albums, which I absolutely adore. MC5, Creedence Clearwater Revival.
Yeah.
Blind Faith, and The Frost, who were a band from Detroit. Dick Wagner, you may know Dick Wagner, the guitar player. Yeah. These are my first albums ever.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. Good old Frost. Yeah. Do you recall getting the second MC5 album back in the USA?
Yes.
And did
the
it shock
difference, yes. Here's the short, sharp 2.5 minute, 3 minute max, just bam, bam, bam songs, as opposed to the ferocity of that first album, which is live, and the songs are like 6-7 minutes on that.
Yeah,
it was night and day. But the thing that, again, like the second side of Zeppelin III, the songs were still so cool. Yeah. Songs like Call Me Animal and Looking at You, all those songs on the Human Being Lawnmower, even though they're just really quick and really short, and the production on that is pretty lame. You can barely hear a bass guitar, but the songs sort of overrode all that stuff because they were so great.
Were you aware of the slight retro intention and vibe of it, back to the 50s, back to garage rock, a little bit on that? Did you feel it was a little dated?
No, I didn't feel it was dated, but there was a thing at the time where a lot of bands, both in America and in England, suddenly went, hey, let's cover some old Chuck Berry song or Little Richard song or Carl Perkins song, like that, and make it our own. Usually like increase the tempo and turn the amps up to 11. And the album is titled Back in the USA, and it opens with that song by Chuck Berry. So I thought, oh yeah, these guys have sort of jumped on the bandwagon as well. But hey man, I like these guys.
Did you ever see any rockers or teddy boys in Coventry?
Oh yeah.
Really?
And especially skinheads.
Wow. Really?
If you went downtown Coventry on a Saturday night, and you looked, I mean, I didn't have hair this long when I was 13, but it was still, it was getting there, and I was wearing t-shirts and stuff. You had to be really careful when you turned around the next corner, because you might be faced with half a dozen skinheads who are going to beat the shit out of you for no particular reason.
And what was their musical taste?
Ska and reggae. Yeah.
Interesting. And you did have rockers and teddy boys too?
Yeah, the teddy boys had kind of faded because they were mainly like, and the rockers were like mainly like early mid 60s, but there was still vestiges of that. Yeah.
Any mods?
By the way, and
any mods?
Mods. Yep.
Really?
Yep. Riding around on the Vespas with like 10 rear view mirrors attached to it and what have you. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. You're aware that Fairies Wear Boots by Sabbath is about skinheads, right?
Yeah.
You do know that, right?
Yep. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. So you would see them regularly, eh? Yeah. Interesting.
Oh yeah. And they were at my school too.
Yeah.
We had to wear school uniforms for that year I was in England, which was my 9th grade. But you knew the guys that were the skinheads, and you knew the guys that were the mods, and me and my friends who were the hard rock guys. Yeah.
So the mods lasted up to 1970, essentially, you're saying?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And then there was the resurgence in the late 70s, and which, if there hadn't have been, you would have never heard of the Jam.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Do you remember anything about the Black Sabbath Paranoid album? Getting that for the first time?
Yeah, because they came on top of the Pops,
Mm-hmm.
and like me and all my friends and most young people tuned into Top of the Pops. I think it was on a Thursday night,
Mm-hmm.
and occasionally you get surprises amidst all the schlock that they would play. And the host would come on, hey, hello there, pop pickers. This evening we've got this kind of thing, and we've got
Yeah.
so and Black Sabbath, and it was like Sabbath's going to be on. So they come on and lip sync to Paranoid, and again, Paranoid. You hear that riff, you go, oh my god.
Yeah.
It's the same as hearing the riff to Whole Lot of Love and
Yeah.
a lot of other songs like that.
Yeah.
There was a
So,
big there was a big controversy because someone swore that one of the last lyrics was actually, I said, and so as you hear these words telling you now of my fate, I tell you to end your life. I
oh,
wish I could, but it's too late. And it was like this band's promoting suicide.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Do you remember
yeah. But
any? Mhm.
no, come on.
Well, I was going to ask, do you remember any sort of satanic scare or any witchy stuff going on?
Yeah, it was. There were some sort of satanic bands at the time. A group called Black Widow
Yeah.
had that rep.
Yeah.
The group Coven had that rep.
Mm-hmm.
And Sabbath, because of the name of the band
Mm-hmm.
and some of my name is Lucifer, please take my hand. Some of the lyrics, yeah, they were included in this as well.
Mm-hmm.
And although at the time in the British music magazines, the band did take pains to say, we're not Satanists. We don't want anything to do with this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And by the
Okay.
way,
How
after
about,
Paranoid came out was when the first time I saw them. That was when I went and saw them up in Birmingham. Curved Air opened for them.
okay.
I was about, and this venue on the Volume 4 album, when you open the gatefold up and there's a picture of them taken from behind them,
Yeah.
that's Birmingham Town Hall.
Nice.
Tiny place.
Yeah.
I must have been 4 or 5 rows back, dead center.
Mm-hmm. And how many people would have been at that show?
300,
Mm-hmm. And they're on their
250.
second album at this point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Curved Air opened for them. So I mean, with that record, there must have been something forming. I mean, that's really a much heavier record than anything previous by anybody, right?
From the first album. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, are you realizing that this is kind of like a new kind of music that's being invented here?
And the term in England for
Mm-hmm.
bands like this were progressive bands.
Okay.
Not to be confused, obviously, with prog now,
Yeah.
but these bands were progressive bands because they'd moved on from pop songs and that kind of mentality.
Yeah. What about underground music? Were they ever called that in the UK?
Whoops, what happened there on my computer? Maybe, but generally it was progressive music. It might have been, yeah, underground was used. Yeah.
Did they ever call them acid rock anymore?
No,
Mm-hmm.
no. They may have applied that still to Jefferson Airplane and Quicksilver Messenger Service and the Grateful Dead, who were,
Mm-hmm.
still around and going great guns at the time. But yeah, not that really heavy stuff. No.
And do you recall when you ever heard anybody first called heavy metal?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Because we know it's got this crazy history back to Humble Pie reviews and things like that, and Metal Mike Saunders.
Yeah.
Yeah, who sent me a bunch of
Yeah.
crazy stuff here, actually. Let's see if I can find I don't have it handy, but yeah, he's a big part of it. And Heavy Metal Fruit and all
Well,
that, and
yep,
yeah,
yeah, and uh, Born to Be Wild,
yeah,
Heavy
Born to
Metal
Be
Thunder.
Wild, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, but I think he was talking more about, that's about describing motorcycles and stuff like that.
yeah.
But
It's a
when
very
did,
gradual use of the term. It's complicated.
yeah,
Right? So okay,
yeah,
well, okay. So how did you position when you first heard Deep Purple in rock versus these other bands?
heard that in England too, during that year.
Okay.
Um, the way a lot of the schools are set up, they have what they call houses.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, you've got like a smaller building, and it doesn't have classrooms as such. It has more like an open area, and there might be an office for whoever's the housemaster.
Mm-hmm.
But so you would learn in these things in these buildings, there'd be learning going on. But during lunch hour, there was a record player in there, and everybody bring in their albums.
Okay.
The first time I was aware of Purple with, Hush and Kentucky Woman, and
Yeah.
I'd seen them on, I think, American Bandstand or something like that. And it's cool and stuff. When I got to England, I was watching Top of the Pops just after I got there. This would be summer of 70. I was like, all right, top pickers tonight, we're going to have Deep Purple. And I'm thinking, are these guys still around?
Right.
They come on, lip sync into Black Knight, and there's Gillan with just a head full of hair like down to here with a pair of lips poking through it, and a microphone, and Blackmore doing his whole shtick, and the riff to Black Knight. It was like, this is Deep Purple. They didn't used to sound like this. So I went out and got the 45.
Okay.
Started school a couple of months later, and a couple of the kids were brought in Deep Purple in rock. Again, just hooked.
Yeah.
Just hooked.
Yeah.
The riffs on that album are just almost every song. And then you've got this epic like Child in Time
Mm-hmm.
with the screams there. Yeah, it was. And then I went saw in a theatre in England, and I sat about 10 rows dead center, left, and literally couldn't hear for about a week later.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was inhumanly loud in a theater.
Yeah. Yeah. And how did you compare them to Black Sabbath? What were their personalities to you in 1970? Do you think?
The personalities of Deep Purple never really stood out. They didn't even in Sabbath either. Sabbath were fairly low key. Ozzy's eccentricities didn't become known until much later on. So it was just these long-haired dudes that were really good musicians playing music that just hooked me. I lived for this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, were there, you always hear that like kids at that age, were you as, or could you be, or were there cliques that were as uncompromising about loving metal as you would get, when it becomes the new wave of British heavy metal sort of thing? Or were you kind of into everything? Was it a little more open because there were way less records around, or were you uncompromising metalheads?
Good question. I think it was more open that younger people would definitely like Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, but they would also be into King Crimson, and maybe Steel Eye Span. They'd listen to some folk stuff as well. So it certainly wasn't, really narrowed like, okay, we like this genre of music and that's it.
Yeah.
And I've always been like that myself. To me, there's, and I'm not trying to be whatever. To me, there's only two kinds of music, and that's stuff you like and stuff you don't.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So when you'd see like a Curved Air supporting Sabbath, they wouldn't get savaged off the stage, like people would be respectful.
People were very open-minded. If you look at some of the concert posters, from that particular time. I have a signed lithograph downstairs from the Fillmore West, and the bill is Zeppelin headlining, Rahsaan Roland Kirk second on the bill, and the Bonzo Dog Doodah Band as the opening group. And people would sit there and just listen to all three of them. And, you know, if they didn't like them, they wouldn't usually, unless they were really terrible, they wouldn't make their displeasure known. You just get light applause. But the bills were very, very, a lot of them were very varied at the time.
Yeah.
You know, I've seen some, you know, really weird bills. You know, at one point in 72, I saw a group called McKendree Spring, who were very folky kind of thing. Next on the bill, Billy Preston. Headline act Uriah Heep.
Right.
And there was no, you know, get the fuck off the stage or anything like that. People just took them for whatever they were. And yeah.
I mean, did you get a sense generally, maybe I've kind of asked this before, but did you get a sense with some of these records that they were inventing a new kind of music, whereas other of these records were just good albums by famous bands, but they weren't particularly inventing a new kind of music?
Yeah. I think, you know, with the hard rock and metal stuff, it was very much like it's so much more aggressive than anything that had come before it.
Yeah.
On the back of the second Amboy Dukes album, Ted Nugent, the rhythm player writes the liner notes, and he said one of the things that separates the current generation of rock musicians is the audacity with which we play our instruments. And I thought, yeah, it's, you know,
yeah,
you know, it's kind of like that, like the Meatloaf album. I'm trying to think what song it is, with the spoken introduction where the kid goes in to his parents' bedroom in the middle of the night with a guitar, and he's gonna kill him, right? Use the guitar to kill him, and the dad wakes up and says, "Son, what do you think you're doing? That's an expensive musical instrument." And that was it. It was like instruments were very precious things for a long time. And then comes, you know, musicians, especially Hendricks, you know, who's throwing his instrument about, lighting it on fire, banging it against the amps. And it was like, hey man, these things, yeah, they cost a bit, but it's a means of expression, but, you know, by any means necessary. So there was that, but there was, I think, the ones like the early prog bands, they were the ones that, you know, sort of, you got the idea they were doing something that really elevated the art form. Yes, ELP, King Crimson, Gentle Giant, all those kind of guys. That you hadn't heard before.
I mean, speaking of King Crimson, I can't think of a band almost to be more shocked about than those first couple of King Crimson albums, right? I mean, they were, you know, Black Sabbath shocking in one way, but King Crimson, you just think these guys are absolutely nuts, right? I mean,
I'm trying to think which band it was. Oh Lord, senior moment. A band that was so known. I'll think of them in a while. They told a friend of mine that they were downtown LA in late 69, early 70, and they decided to make the evening interesting by dropping acid. And they're walking up and down the Sunset Strip, and they go, "Let's go see who's on at the Whiskey A Go Go." And they go in there. They have no idea who the band is, and it's King Crimson, and they see them while tripping on acid. And they told my friend, we just came out and we were in a completely different world. Ambrosia, that's the band.
Funny. Also, it was somebody from the band Ambrosia, when they were young.
A couple of guys.
Basically,
a couple of guys from Ambrosia.
King Crimson, right? Funny,
tripping on acid and having no idea who these guys were. And it was the original lineup. The guys are on Court of the Crimson King.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
can't even imagine that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me just ask you about a couple more. I've kept you a long time. We won't go too much longer. We maybe don't go through all these, but I'm kind of curious. What were your views of hearing that first Blue Oyster Cult album for the first time?
I was into Yes, right? Always been a massive Yes fan. I went with a couple of friends to downtown Detroit to this concert hall where the Detroit Symphony played.
Mm-hmm.
And because the band I wanted to see was a group called Flash.
Yeah.
Do you know Flash, Martin?
Yeah, Peter Banks and all that. Yeah.
Peter Banks, the original guitar player, and yes, it was his band. Yeah. And I bought the first two albums. I thought the first album was really good. I thought the second album was exceptional. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to go see Flash. Yeah. So we go down there. And I think I knew before I went that the opening band was Blue Oyster Cult. Hmm. And I may have heard Cities on Flame on the radio. Maybe. Okay. So lights go out, band comes on. The first thing I notice is the bass player, the drummer, and Eric Bloom, who did most of the vocals, are dressed head to toe in leather, black leather.
Okay.
Alan Lanier, the keyboard player, has got a trench coat on and round sunglasses, and he just looks kind of creepy.
Yeah.
And the lead player's got a white tuxedo on.
Okay.
It's like, wow, this is pretty goddamn interesting.
Yeah.
They started, and about second or third song in, I went, who the fuck are these guys? This is unreal.
Yeah.
The riffs just kept coming. And the lyrics, and I could understand the lyrics, which a lot of times you can't at concerts. I could understand the lyrics. I had no idea what they were talking about half the time, but there were these quasi-occult, bizarre lyrics on top of these riffs. Mm-hmm. And I was just floored. Mm-hmm. They completely blew Flash off the stage. Right. And the next day I woke up and it was like, I have one thing to do today, and that's to go and get that Blue Oyster Cult album. Right. So let me see if these guys can actually be as impressive on vinyl as they are as I saw them last night. Mm-hmm. And they were. I thought so. Mm-hmm. To me, that first album, again, the riffs on there and the aggressiveness and the playing, I was just floored.
Mm-hmm. But it sounds a little old, right? It sounds a little older than Sabbath and Purple. It's a little Doorsy, right? It's a little Steppenwolfy, right?
Again, I'm 16 at this point. Mm-hmm. So I still really don't go, how does this compare to these other bands? Right. I just put the needle down and went, oh my God.
Yeah.
And you get Cities on Flame, you know,
yeah.
on your stereo as opposed to a little speaker in the car. Yeah. And that thing just hits you like a Mack truck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, you know, that gets you. But to me, all the other songs on the album, they just floored me.
Yeah. Did you ever buy cassettes or 8-tracks? How many 45s did you buy?
I have a lot of 45s. I've done about 300-400 45s, but they're from my younger years. You know, when I was probably like 9 years old up to about 13. But I did used to buy them later on if there was an unreleased song on the B-side.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and when I used to go back to England, after I moved back to the States and was living with my dad, I'd go back to England to see my mother and my siblings during the summer. I'd go into record stores and I'd just go, you got any Deep Purple 45s? And they go, yeah. And they pull out like 3 different ones. And I'd look and go, whoa, this song isn't on the album. I'll take that. Yeah. You know, done a Uriah Heep 45s? Yeah. Whoa, this isn't on the album. I'll take that.
Yeah.
And then look through the albums and you get like King Crimson's Earthbound album, which wasn't released in the States. Jethro Tull's Living in the Past album. Oh my God, a double album of Jethro Tull.
Right.
take that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would buy them, but mainly I was an album guy. Yeah, absolutely was an album guy.
Yeah.
I never bought
right.
8 tracks, even though I've been gifted some. I've got a couple of 100 8 tracks, which I was gifted, and I've got a really nice Pioneer 8-track player. I didn't have a cassette player until I was like 2021.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember, did you consume Rolling Stone magazine or Cream, or was it mostly Melody Maker?
Every single issue.
Mm-hmm.
In the room next to us here, which my wife and I refer to as the library,
Mm-hmm.
I have every issue of Cream magazine, every one.
Yeah, nice.
Every issue of Circus magazine.
Yeah.
The first 100 issues of Kerrang.
Right.
Every issue of Mojo.
Yeah.
Every issue of Classic Rock. Every issue of Rock Candy.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've got, I mean, especially the Cream and Circus ones, the ones near and dear to my heart. But Rolling Stone, I never kept them, but I bought every single issue from like late '69 onwards. And I canceled my subscription about 3-4 years ago when Jan Wenner sold that magazine, and suddenly you were getting these in-depth articles about Britney Spears and Jay-Z and whatever, and I went, I don't give a shit about these people.
Funny. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's leave it at that, David. This has been very cool. I love hearing about this old stuff. It's awesome. So we'll put together a little episode of this, and our viewers can comment on below. Like, let us know if anybody else has stories of being there on the ground floor for these things. But yeah, this has been a lot of fun. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah. And again, I've got all my original pressings of all these albums talking about, and then I went and saw all these bands.
Yeah. Very funny.
By any means necessary.
Yeah.
Went and saw all these guys.
I'll tell you a bit of a funny story. I mean, every time when we were kids and we would run into copies of Stooges albums or MC5 albums, it was always the French Electra pressings. Never saw an American pressing in my life until like 20 years ago.
Because you're 7 years younger than me, and at that point, 7 years after those albums came out, they were out of print. They weren't in print in the United States, but they still had enough of a following,
right,
that overseas they went, well, we're going to keep pressing these. And American record stores and Canadian record stores said, yeah, we're going to import these things and sell them.
Yeah.
I have those French pressings too.
Yeah. Very cool. All right, man. Well, very cool. I'll let you get on with your day, but thanks again for this. We'll chat soon.
Anytime, Martin. It's been a pleasure.
All right. We'll talk to you later. Okay. See ya.
Okay. See ya.
Bye now.